After the Utah Jazz finished with the #1 seed in the NBA last year and losing in the conference semifinals, the Jazz have kind of taken a step back this season. They currently have a record of 40-24, and they're only just a half game above the #5 seed in the Dallas Mavericks, where the Jazz currently sit at #4, and they just lost to the Dallas Mavericks last night, 103-111. Luka Doncic was nothing short of great, finishing with 35, 16, and 7, but Donovan Mitchell struggled mightily in this game, going 17, 4, and 9, but he only shot 5 of 19 from the field and just 2 of 9 from deep. But I'm here to tell Jazz fans and the rest of the NBA community that the Utah Jazz are still title contenders, and while a lot of the national media and a lot of the NBA fan base has been counting them out, the Jazz are still contenders, and I'm going to give you guys 3 reasons why the Utah Jazz are still going to be competing for the NBA Finals this season, so let's get into that. Now, before I actually get into why I believe the Jazz are title contenders, if you guys don't know already, I do a podcast every single week called the Don't Overthink It podcast with my co-host, Chill Takes, where we talk NFL and NBA, and the podcast comes out every single Friday morning here on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts as well. So if you guys want to go check that out, I will link to it down below. Now let me get in today's video talking about the Jazz. Now, the first reason as to why I believe the Utah Jazz are title contenders is really with their depth. Now, Quinn Snyder and the Utah Jazz have made the playoffs the last 5 seasons. Now, while they haven't made the conference finals in these 5 seasons under Quinn Snyder, in which they've made the playoffs consecutively, this is the Utah Jazz team with the most depth. This team has a great backup center in Hassan Whiteside, who probably is the best backup center in the NBA. Jordan Clarkson, a reigning 6th man of the year. Obviously, Joe Ingles got traded to the Portland Trailblazers after he had torn his ACL. But then you go down the list of guys coming off the bench, from Rudy Gay to Jordan Clarkson to Hassan Whiteside, Eric Pascal, who really, I believe, still needs to get more minutes in this rotation. Trent Forrest is a very solid, serviceable backup when Jared Butler plays as well, and I'm sure there's a guy or two off the top of my head that I'm just not thinking of. But the Utah Jazz really have a lot of depth coming off of this bench, and I think that this team is battle tested, and I think that's a big reason as to why I believe in this team so much. But also, you just look at the ranks of what this Utah Jazz team has done this season. They're #1 in offensive efficiency, they're #7 in 3-point percentage, they're #6 in points per game, #4 in rebounds per game. I believe that they're #2 or #1 in 3-point makes per game. They're #11 in defensive points per game and #11 in defensive efficiency. Now, defensively, I like to see that go up, because the big thing with this team has always been guarding the perimeter, and Rudy Gobert having to come out on the guards, even though he's done significantly better this year. And we saw that just last week with Luka Doncic in Salt Lake City. Rudy Gobert held his own versus Luka. But the Utah Jazz have a lot of depth offensively and defensively. They're still a very well-coached team. Quinn Snyder does need to do a little bit better when it comes to making adjustments, especially when he sees that the team is struggling and teams are going on a run on them. But otherwise, I think that is a big reason as to why the Utah Jazz can still be contenders. My second reason as to why the Utah Jazz are still contenders is because of the adversity they've been through. Now, I told you that they've made the consecutive playoffs for 5 straight seasons now, but the thing is with this team is that they've heard the criticism, they've heard the noise, and everyone just wants to write them off and just talk about the Golden State Warriors, the Phoenix Suns, the Memphis Grizzlies, etc., which I don't blame the national media and a large proportion of the NBA fan base, is the fact that these last 2 seasons, especially in the playoffs, back in the bubble, they didn't have Bojan Bogdanovic. Granted, they had a 3-1 lead on Denver, but they didn't have Bojan Bogdanovic, and we just saw he made an NBA record 11 threes versus OKC with no 2-pointers. Bojan Bogdanovic is a phenomenal and one of the better role players in the game. Then last season, they didn't have Mike Conley for the first 5 games of that series in the conference semifinals versus the LA Clippers. I understand that Donovan Mitchell was hobbled with an ankle injury as well. He wasn't 100%. I understand Kawhi Leonard had torn his ACL as well. But not having your primary ball handler in Mike Conley running this offense and taking that pressure and alleviating some of that pressure off of a guy like Donovan Mitchell, that played a big role as to why the Utah Jazz crumbled in that series after a 2-0 lead. If the Jazz go in and they are actually healthy into these playoffs, because that's the most important thing. The seeding, to me, really isn't that important. If they get a 4 seed, that's cool. I'd love to get first home court advantage in the first round. But really, it comes down to the fact that if Mike Conley and the rest of this team is healthy, this Utah Jazz team can go out there and compete. And the last thing I want to say about the adversity is the Milwaukee Bucks for 2 seasons were written off by everybody that they are not playoff performers. They're not a playoff caliber team. They're a great regular season team, and Giannis is just a dominant force in the regular season, because we saw in 2019 they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals to the eventual champions in the Toronto Raptors. which that was a heartbreaking series for them. Then obviously in 2020, they were bounced by the Miami Heat in the bubble, but then last season they went and won the NBA championship. Now, granted, the Jazz don't have a Giannis. Nobody in the NBA has a Giannis, but you get my point. They were gone through the adversity. They'd been written off, but in year 3, they took that next step. This is something where I see in year 3 for the Jazz with a real legitimate team, they can take that next step. And the last reason as to why the Utah Jazz are still title contenders is because of Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell, and I've already talked about this on the Don't Overthink It podcast with my co-host Chill Takes, in the NBA postseason is a top 10 player. That's where he elevates his game, and that's where we see great players elevate their game. Steph Curry and James Harden, 2 phenomenal all-time great players. They are still great players in the postseason, but they low-key shrink in the postseason. They're not quite the same player in the postseason as they are in the regular season. Donovan Mitchell is the complete opposite. Donovan Mitchell this season in the regular season is averaging 25.7 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, 5.4 assists, shooting 45.2% from the field, which is a career high, and also 35.5% from 3. But in the playoffs is where Donovan Mitchell is a money maker. Donovan in the playoffs averages 28.8 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, 4.6 assists, and 33 career playoff games. And Donovan Mitchell, fun fact, ranks number 5 in NBA postseason history in points per game, averaging 28.8 points per game behind Jerry West, Michael Jordan, Allen Iverson, and Kevin Durant. Then it's Donovan Mitchell. He is a phenomenal playoff performer, and he is nothing short of great when it comes to his playoff performances. It's really more so just the team around him not coming through, which I think if healthy, and I think if Quinn Snyder learns to make some of these adjustments, the Utah Jazz can seriously go out there and compete. We've seen the Golden State Warriors. They're 2-8 in their last 10 games. Draymond Green will definitely help them pick things back up once he gets back to the court. Rudy Gobert still a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Daniel House, another guy I didn't mention. He's a guy that can really help guard the perimeter when it comes to postseason play as well. And that's been the big thing with the Jazz. How are they going to guard the perimeter on these pick and rolls when Rudy Gobert has to switch out? And if the Jazz can learn to adjust to that, which I think that they've done a better job with that this season, even though it's still not perfect, the Jazz are still as good as anybody when healthy in the Western Conference, and they can go and compete with Chris Paul and the Phoenix Suns, who are probably my favorite as of right now to still come out of the West. Utah, Denver, I think once they get Michael Porter and Jamal Murray back. Golden State, obviously, I'm not a believer in Memphis, even though they're going to be a tough out for any team. The Utah Jazz are still contenders in the NBA. That's just my thoughts on it. Now, Jazz fans and NBA fans, I want to hear your guys' thoughts down below. Do you guys think that if healthy, the Utah Jazz are still contenders? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you guys enjoyed the content, make sure you guys drop me a thumbs up. It takes 1 second and it helps me in the channel out tremendously. And consider hitting that subscribe bell to stay tuned for more NBA and Jacksonville Jaguars content that I do here on YouTube. But thank you guys so much for sticking around for the entire video. Brett James, aka BJ. I'm out, y'all. Peace.